This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 279.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. As sales engineers, we have a specific task that we need to do, which is help sales help customers understand how we solve problems, how we solve their problems, and then help the sales team actually sell the product. Some people may disagree with my assessment. I don't care. That's how I see it. No one has been able to actually tell me why they disagree, but whatever, that's not the point. We are in sales. Our job is to sell. The way we go about it is ethical and by solving problems, but that's if we don't do that, we're out of the job, basically. So today I'm talking to Chris White about how we can do that, and more importantly, when we're going through our career, we're going to get into situations where you can tell that we're in a rut or there's a plateau, any of these situations. And I just wanted to talk to him about how he's overcome it throughout his career, how others can overcome it as well, because he's just one example, a great example, but still one example. So here are some ideas that we discussed throughout this conversation. If you do like the show, please make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a rating and or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the show. I would highly appreciate it. And I'm sure the others who are looking for the show will appreciate it because they know this is a reputable show. Let's jump into the show now. Mr. White, so good to see you. Welcome back for the fifth time. I think you have the record. Welcome
Ramsey, back. Thank you so much, sir. It's been far too long. It's nice to see you again. I've been following you on all your different channels. You pop up in my feed every time I go on a LinkedIn or YouTube. You pop up on my phone like literally every other day. So it's very good to see you again, my friend.
I'm not stalking you, but I'm happy to hear that. And I am doing my best to go to your LinkedIn lives. It's just sometimes, it's there in the middle of the day and we have customer meetings that
I get it.
Sometimes take precedence. But
you've got a full-time day job, so I don't know how you do what you do.
The thing is, when I do show up, I learn so much just from listening to you ask questions, and so I appreciate the work that you're doing as well. And that's what people see. People don't see what you do behind the scenes as well. And so I'm happy to have you here.
Nice of you to say.
Oh, it is my pleasure. I don't say anything that's untrue, and you know that. So today, we kind of figured let's take a couple of topics. A lot of people right now, we're in a tough market right now where it's a employer market. And I talked to several people who, including myself, who sometimes suffer through career plateaus.
Yeah.
So maybe let's just stop here for a second. And can you define what you believe career plateau is? I mean, it might be obvious, but let's just dig into that a little bit.
No, I think it's good to try to define it, and I'm not sure I'm the foremost expert or have the definitive answer or definition, but I think there are times in our career where we are very focused on maybe an objective or a milestone. Maybe that's hitting, if we're a sales professional, maybe it's hitting a certain quota. If we're a sales engineer, maybe it's closing a certain number of deals, or just being part of a team that hits our number and hits our quota. Maybe if we're not a sales engineer, it's landing our first pre-sales job. I think when we do first get into pre-sales, I think for many of us, the first year is a blur because there's so much to learn, and we're maybe learning a new product or learning the industry, learning how to become or be an effective sales engineer. As people know, I like to talk about whether that's giving effective demos and feeling as though we're in our comfort zone, or becoming more effective in discovery. But I think there are times when we get to a point where we've achieved maybe what it was that we were hoping to achieve. We've landed the job we were hoping to land, or we have achieved a certain income level that we were seeking. And then it just sort of flattens out, where maybe we're not feeling as challenged as we once were. We're not feeling as motivated as we once were. And there's no specific milestone or objective or challenge that we are striving for. And we become complacent. We become less motivated, and we're not really sure what's driving us. To me, and that was a long-winded answer and a long-winded definition, but to me, that's a plateau where I'm not sure what it is that I'm striving for next in my career. Let me pause there. Does that definition resonate with you, Ramsey?
It does, and it's so different than how I would have defined it, which is good to hear. In my mind, a plateau, let's say someone is an SE and want to become a senior SE or senior SE leader, or move up, and they just can't bust through. That to me is, I guess, another definition of plateau, and I never thought about your definition the way you just mentioned, so it's interesting to have both definitions, and I'm happy I asked that question. What are your thoughts about my definition?
I think your definition is it's arguably more concise and more measurable, right? I think at the end of the day, and here's what I sincerely believe. I think sales engineers who have been in the role for anywhere from 2 to 5 years, I think they're inevitably going to hit some sort of plateau, because they've either achieved what it was that they wanted to achieve when they got into the role. They've gone through that learning curve of figuring out how to be effective in the role, and maybe they're not sure what's next. Do they want to go into a management role or not? Right. Maybe they're considering moving further, quote, to the dark side, as some people say, and become an account executive. Maybe some are considering moving into product. Some might be considering moving into product marketing. And others might be considering, do I just continue to be a sales engineer? And if so, how do I grow in my career? So that, to me, and so I think it's a little bit of both. I think your definition and my definition, I think create a good, it's almost like the right brain and left brain version of the definition.
Well, I also believe that in order to get into the management part, you have to first bust through the plateau that you're facing as a individual contributor.
100%.
So yeah, like I think what you were saying leads to, I guess I was thinking one step ahead, but if you've been doing this for 2 to 5 years and you've hit a plateau, you need to bust through that before even considering becoming an SE manager.
Absolutely.
Because that's where you need to help others bust through plateaus.
Absolutely.
So I'm just thinking about this. I mean, in the first 2 years, I sucked as an SE, and I thought that I was the best thing since sliced bread. But let's take someone else. I mean, actually, let me ask you, what plateau have you faced throughout your career as an individual contributor, as an SE? Do you still recall? Like, I know it's a couple of years back, so it wasn't a long time ago. Do you still recall?
Oh, I mean, I absolutely recall, and I mean, you've heard me talk about sort of the background and the history on the 6 habits, and honestly, I think each one of the 6 habits was sort of the result of hitting a plateau, feeling like I had figured things out, and then realizing that I was just fooling myself, and that there were areas that I needed to improve. And the first, I wouldn't even call it a plateau. I mean, the first sort of barrier or obstacle that I had to overcome was just accepting the fact that I was a sales professional, and I was no longer a technical professional or a technical expert primarily, right? And then I figured out how to give an effective sales demonstration but I realized, and sort of the plateau was, all right, well, I feel like I'm giving good presentations, but I'm walking into meetings unprepared. And why am I walking into meetings unprepared? Because I'm relying on the information that I'm getting from sales. And so I need to start doing some of my own discovery. But then after I started doing discovery, I found that I was spending way too much time preparing for meetings and demos, focusing on all the wrong things, right? But I think, Ramsey, probably about 3 years into my career, I'd sort of figured all those things out, right? And I was doing discovery, and I was preparing with the end in mind, and not over preparing for demos and not under preparing, and I felt like I was doing not only a good job of preparing and delivering demos, but then in the aftermath, whether that was supporting evaluations, proof of concepts, proof of values, right? I was doing all, and it was starting to feel routine to me. And here's something certainly that I know about myself, and I suspect a lot of sales engineers fall into this trap as well. When our job begins to feel routine, I think that's when we fall back into bad habits.
Yep.
And so, to answer your question a little bit more concisely, I would say probably every 2 to 3 years in my career, I think I start feeling like, okay, this is becoming routine, and I need to do something to challenge myself to break out of that mold. And if I don't, that's where I begin to slip backwards. So let me pause there. Does that resonate with you, Ramsey?
100%. I mean, yes, 100%. The questions that's popping in my mind right now is, I mean, some people get into that phase where it's routine and just love it and live
Absolutely.
it. And they might never fall back into bad habits, but they're not interested in doing anything else. We're good. I can coast. I can stay in this role for 15, 20 years, retire, and I'm out. But others don't want that. Some people want to, like, if you're there, I'm happy for you. But for those who don't, I mean, what are some of the goals that they can think of? I mean, what did you do to bust through that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think for starters, we have to recognize that about ourselves, and we have to recognize that we're sort of in that plateau. Another term people might use is rut. They feel like they're in a bit of a rut. I think you have to be patient with yourself a little bit. I think you have to allow yourself to experience the emotions. And then I think we need to be creative in considering what can we do to challenge ourselves. Go ahead. You had a thought.
Well, just that's the big thing, right? As sales engineers, even if they're in that zone, they're busy doing things. It's not like they're not busy. They're just doing demos, doing POCs, whatever. And if you're too busy doing things, how are you able to recognize that you are in that rut? And how do you get the self-awareness to do that?
Well, I mean, you just used I think you just used the very word. I mean, we have to do some self-awareness, and how do we do that? I mean, I think, first of all, I think it begins with being honest with ourselves, right? And taking a look at where are we spending our time, and are we being honest with ourselves about our goals, our desires, right? What do we want to accomplish, and our why, right? What is the driver? Why is it that we want to, or think we want to achieve A, B, C, or X, Y, Z? The other or another thought that comes to mind for me is there's a certain comfort that comes. It's ironic, right? It's sort of a dichotomy. There's a certain comfort that comes with being in a plateau or being in a rut, but there's also a certain level of dissatisfaction, right? And so, right, and frustration, right? but it's also it's a little bit easier. So I think we all have a certain amount of laziness in us, right? And so the laziness in us just wants to coast, right? And take quote the easier road. But I think we know longer term that's not what's going to make us, for many of us, that's not what's going to make us satisfied in the long run. So I know for me, when I've found myself in that place, I know that it takes courage to be honest with myself about what it is that I need to do to break out of this plateau or break out of the rut, right? And I've got to make some difficult decisions regarding, well, what do I want to focus on? What do I want to challenge myself with, and put forth the effort to do it? And I think we always know that satisfaction lies on the other side of effort and challenge and taking on our fears. But we have to find the wherewithal to do that, I think. Does that resonate with you?
I mean, yeah, it sounds like the key words here that you mentioned at the beginning was that goals, and understand your why. And most of us go through our careers, we don't know our goals before we get started. And we don't have, our why is to make money, right? Initially, like when I graduated university, I just wanted a job so I can make money and feed myself.
Of course.
So it seems like individuals, whoever they are, kind of have to sit and figure out what their goals for their careers, which could change, right? Like it's like a GPS. You have the end destination, and as you're going to the end destination, you may decide, you know what, that destination is not for me. I want to go somewhere else.
It will change as we age. It will change. I mean, you know, I have 5 kids, the youngest of which is a rising junior in college. My why, right, and my targets are changing dramatically, given that all of my kids are about to graduate from, I'm about to have all kids out of college, right? So things are changing for me, right?
Yeah. But the point is, I think you have to have a starting why, because if you don't have that, how are you going to know where to go? How are you going to review your goals? How are you going to know if you're closer today than you were yesterday? And again, even if it might changes, it could be still in the same direction. Like right now, maybe like your why is, hey, I want to do this so my kids can pay for their university. And as soon as they're done university, it's like, hey, I want to do this so my kids can pay for their wedding, or whatever it is, or so I can retire comfortable. Whatever it is, it will change, but it's still in the same trajectory.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And something that comes to mind for me, Ramsey, I'm inspired. The 2 thoughts that I'm inspired to share. First is you were talking about goals, and I think you've heard me share this part of my story, is that I spent the first 15 years of my career as an IT architect, IT consultant, right? Software engineer, software architect. And about 15 years into my career, I was making more money than I thought I'd ever make as an enterprise architecture consultant, doing exactly what I thought it was that I wanted to be doing. And yet I was miserable in my job, and I was miserable in my career. And so what's the point? I got to exactly where I thought it was that I wanted to be. I achieved the very goal that I was after, and realized that I was unhappy. And it was at that point, you may recall this part of my story. Like I realized that I thought there was something wrong with me. Like I literally decided that I needed to seek help. And I found a professional career development organization. In fact, a gentleman that was running a career counseling program. And I went and I paid a fair amount of money to go through his program, but I learned a number of things about myself that I didn't understand. And I think I knew, but I wasn't able to articulate before I went through his program. And it was that program that encouraged me and gave me the confidence to move into a sales career. And so I think, one of the key points is that if you've set your sights on a career objective or career goal and have gotten there and realized that, wow, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, right? I think that's the time to accept that, okay, it's not a failure. I don't need to go back to the start, right? But maybe it's just time to reevaluate and reassess. And the second thought that I had in context with that is it's a journey, and every step along the way is an important step, because at every step we learn something more about ourselves, we learn something more about industry, we learn something more about where we excel and where we struggle, and I think we can continue to craft a career in that context.
I love that, because I get a couple of thoughts when you're saying that. You don't know, like, all right, you have an end goal, but you don't know if it's the right goal until you get there. But the fact of the matter is, you couldn't have thought of the next goal until you got to the first one. Right?
Exactly.
And the second thing is, you need to invest in yourself as well. Right? You invested in yourself. You paid for someone for their services to figure out what you want. Sometimes you don't have to do it alone. I think that's the point. Like, you can figure out what your next steps are. You don't have to be alone to do that.
100%. I mean, and look, I mean, I think the story about the book, and it's interesting, as I reflect on my career, I realize that some of the best decisions that I made were in investing in myself by working with coaches. The gentleman that I mentioned, in fact, I'll even make a plug for him. His name is Anthony Spatafor. He was on, you mentioned my LinkedIn Live. So he's been a guest on my LinkedIn Live show. He still runs an organization called pathfinders.org. And I spent what felt like at the time a lot of money to go through his program, but his program is the reason that I had the confidence to go into pre-sales and discovered that was the ideal career for me. Now, the other thing I'm inspired to share, again, you may recall this part of my story, is that after I'd been in pre-sales for almost a decade, both as an individual contributor and a leader, and an enablement specialist and trainer, I'd had a number of people say, gee, Chris, you ought to write a book. And I tried to, for like 3 years, I would start and stop and start and stop and start and stop. And then I found a publishing coach, and I wrote a really big check to him, a much bigger check than I thought was, and it was a big investment. But he said to me, Chris, if you do everything I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, you will publish a book as a #1 best-selling new release on Amazon in 2 months or less. I wasn't sure I believed him, but I desperately wanted to. And as they say, the rest is history. The book was published in literally 2 days, less than 2 months, as a #1 best-selling new release on Amazon. And shortly thereafter, I launched this business. So, and by the way, I was 51 years old, I think it was 51, 55. I was 51 years old when I did that, right? So I had 30 years of a career with a number of stops along the way before I finally got to that point, and before I finally got to the point where now I know for sure that I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do with my career. But every step along the way was an important step, right? So, anyway, I hopefully that might be inspirational for someone listening.
Well, it's inspirational for me to know that you had like 4 or 5 career goals before reaching where you are today, and that's not the final destination. Like, your goal was to be like graduate university and go into software architecture, then go into sales or pre-sales, go into sales leadership, and now you have your own company, right?
Yeah.
And that's like 4 that I just counted. Well, I think I'm like jumping over parts of your life, but as a summary, even you, Chris White, who's been doing this for a long time, has had career goals change, and you've had to have help along the way. And the question that is popping in my mind right now, like, as an individual contributor, someone who's new to the industry, let's say, I don't know where I want to go, and I don't know what goals, like, as an individual contributor, what are some of the goals that I need to look at to overcome this plateau that I'm in? So the question that's popping in my head, what is the role of SE management in helping the individuals bust through their career plateau and not risking that person having to find another company that would help him or her bust through that plateau?
That's a really good question. I'm so glad you asked. And it's particularly relevant for me right now, Ramsey, because recently I've been working with a number of SE leaders. When I think of just leadership, when I think of the role of the manager, the leader, whether it's SE or sales or other, I like to think in terms of three roles or three responsibilities, if I can use that term. And the three responsibilities are to lead, to manage, and to coach. Okay. And I think, I work with a company called Aslan Training and Development.
Yep.
And we have a model that we refer to commonly as the three dials that we as managers have to drive results. Okay. And the three dials, as we like to say, are to drive desire, productivity, and capability. If we are driving and enabling desire, productivity, and capability or competency, if I can use that term, the three of them equal results. Okay. So, to get back to your question, how can we as leaders help our people break through a plateau? The question is, which of those three dials do we need to focus on? Is the problem a desire problem? Are the individuals that are reporting to us or under our guidance, under our responsibility, if I can use that term, is it a lack of desire? And if it's a lack of desire, there's usually some reasons why there's a lack of desire to change, right? Either they don't believe the payoff is there, maybe there are some competing beliefs, maybe ego is getting in the way, maybe there's a relationship problem between you and that individual or between them and the organization. If it's the second, maybe it's a productivity problem. Right. And if it's a productivity problem, maybe we're doing the wrong things, or maybe they're just feeling bored. Right. Maybe we need to talk about why are you, let's talk about what's getting in the way of you being more productive. And then the third piece is maybe it's a capability issue. Right. They're demonstrating the desire. They really want to change. They really want to improve, but they're just struggling to develop. So now we need to put more of a coaching plan in place. Right. So I'll pause there. You sort of smiled, I think, when I laid out those three components as if it struck a chord.
It struck a chord in the sense that most managers that I know don't look at the intrinsic values of an individual in order to help them achieve their goals, which will then in turn help them achieve their goals. It sounds to me, whenever I hear people talk about management, it's more of a stick than a carrot. And even if they're using a carrot, it's the wrong carrot. It's the carrot that helps, the carrot that would work on the manager.
No doubt.
It will work on themselves, but it wouldn't work on the individual. And each individual has a different carrot, the desire.
No doubt.
Right.
Well, and you use the word intrinsic, right? I think the best leaders are those that take the time to understand their people and what are their goals, what are their drivers, what are they trying to achieve, and help them discover the intrinsic drivers for themselves, right? And look, I mean, what you're talking about is, and I think you're familiar with the fact that this organization that I work with, Aslan Training and Development, we use this term other-centered
Yep.
selling, other-centered leadership. And what the best way to understand that is it's the opposite of self-centered, right? So just consider the characteristics of a self-centered leader versus the characteristics of an other-centered leader, right? Yeah. I mean, that's really what you're talking about here.
Yeah, and my experience has been, there's a lot of companies that I talk to individuals and they tell me they have great leaders who are more like coaches, but my experience has been most meetings are funnel centered. So
Totally.
it's right. It's or like anything not related to the like if I want something, I have to bring it up, and there's never a coaching session behind it. So it could be just my personal experience. Other people could have it differently.
Look, I think many managers and many leaders struggle with this. I think a lot of SE leaders and SE managers struggle with this in particular. Why? Who usually elevates or moves into, or what is the profile of the individual who's usually moved into a management role?
Well, briefly, someone a go-getter type A personality who excels at pretty much everything that they do.
It's usually the best SE on the team.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's usually oftentimes the top performing SEs are the ones that move into a management role.
Yep.
And here's the irony and the challenge is that what makes us particularly effective as sales engineers is almost the opposite of what makes us particularly effective as SE managers. We literally have to shift gears, right?
Yep.
Now, but look, that's on the individual to a great degree. That's on the individual, right? If we're going to make that shift, we need to be willing to make the sort of the shift in our mental compass, that it's no longer about me being an individual contributor, me being a superstar. It's really about now me putting my team in the position and developing my team and letting them become the superstars. If we tend to like SEs tend to like the stage, and as an SE manager, there are times when you might have the stage, but it's more about making your team members and developing your team members so that they can become the superstars and shine on stage, right? So we need to make that mental shift. So look, it's not easy, Ramsey. It's not easy. And we all default, as I like to say, we all quote default to self, right? We all prioritize. It's human nature to prioritize self, right? And the example I give to people, in fact, when I run workshops, I literally open the workshop by taking a photograph of the group, and then I say, would you guys like to see the picture? And they're like, yeah. And I show them the picture, and then I ask them, who did you look for first? And what's the answer?
Me,
right? We default to self. So in a sales role, we have to make the conscious decision to not prioritize ourselves and our agenda. As a leader, we need to make the conscious decision to not prioritize self. And it's not easy. And we're always going to default back to self if we're not constantly reminding ourselves it's not about me, it's about them.
It's interesting because when you're talking about this, it sounds a lot like parenting.
Amen.
Where you're enabling your kids, it's easy for you to sacrifice yourself for your kids so that they can get better and they get the stage. And when you become in the professional world, I mean, these kids that you're training could leave you at any point in time, right? There isn't that loyalty or anything like that, or it could be, I don't know, depends on the company. But yeah, so I see what you're saying, and I like what you're saying as well.
I am inspired. There's another thought that comes to mind, and you've invited me to be a guest on your show a few times, so I may have said this before. I think it's worth saying again. You mentioned what can SE managers do to help their people break through a plateau. I'm inspired to say that we are all the CEOs of our own career.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, yes, I think the best leaders and managers are consistently looking to help their people grow and advance in their careers. But at the end of the day, we need to take ownership of our own career.
Yeah. And well, here's the thing. If you want something as an individual contributor, there's a lot of expectation that management will just read our mind and help us achieve it. but you might want something that's completely different than me. How is our manager going to know? So if you want something, you're going to have to ask for it and ask for help to get it. I mean, you ask for help by paying someone external, and that's an option. But you can also talk to your management, and if what you want helps the manager achieve their goals as well, they will be happy to help you.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to say, right, this is where, as employees of an organization, I do think it's our responsibility to recognize that we have a responsibility to the organization, and we've made a commitment by signing the employment letter. We've made a commitment to uphold that responsibility, and it is a two-way street. So just like we talked about managers being other-centered in their role, we too have to be other-centered in our role, and recognize that we have an obligation to the organization to make the contribution that we've signed up to make, right? And the more we can align what we are trying to achieve with contribution to the organization, that's the ideal scenario.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you want something that contradicts what the company wants, then it's time for you to find another company that matches your
exactly, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, that's okay.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's good. At least you
identified
it.
Yeah, it comes back to being honest with ourselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, I want to go back just before we end the show. If someone's been doing this for 3 to 5 years and they don't know what possible goals they could have, like short-term goals, I'm not talking like, hey, I want to be the CEO of a company, but as an SE who's been doing this for 2 to 5 years and they're plateauing, is there an example you can provide of like something they can think about to be their next goal?
Good question. Is there an example I can give? Yes. I would say list out all the things that you believe you should be excelling in, all the areas that you think you should be excelling in, and give yourself a grade. And then if there's any area that you're not giving yourself, let's say a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10, there's an opportunity for you to focus. Now, what are some of the things that might go on that list? How well I interact with and collaborate with sales, how effective I am in discovery, how much, and obviously I'm sort of referring to 6 Habits because that's a framework that I'm familiar with. How effective are you in preparing for meetings or developing material for meetings? How well are you in engaging in customer facing interactions, whether that's demos, proof of concepts, technical deep dives, etc. And then if you're giving yourself a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 on all those, the next level is, what are you doing for the organization? Or what are you doing for your colleagues? Are you being proactive in helping other people develop their skills? Are you developing content? Are you writing articles on LinkedIn? Are you offering to write blogs? Are you being more proactive in connecting with other, maybe connecting with the PSC? Have you considered, publishing in some context, right? And then how can you contribute to maybe your industry as a whole, right? Are you becoming recognized in the particular industry that you serve? So to me, I think there's levels of influence and effectiveness that we can itemize, grade ourselves, and then pick one or two to focus on and develop.
2 thoughts come to mind. For some reason, we always do 2 thoughts. One, after you grade yourself, I would say pass on that grading scale to your manager or teammates. Because we're either always too optimistic about ourselves or too pessimistic about ourselves.
Get feedback. Love that.
The second thought that comes to mind is, like, if you any other role, like software engineering, your tasks are defined. You can do this. network support. That's your task. Support the customer. Sales engineering is kind of an endless pit or endless opportunity for you to highlight yourself. Because you mentioned early on, how we do this, how do we do this? That's like, how do we work with sales? How do we prepare? These sound like basic tasks that we do. And then you expand it to, are you creating content? Not something that we think about as sales engineers, but that's something you can do. There's an endless opportunity. So you can basically pick any goal. My goal when I plateaued, I talked to my manager and he gave me an extra assignment of consolidating the lab or creating a lab tool for the team. Right? I didn't come up with it myself. I didn't have to think about it. I just went to him and said, like, hey, I'm bored. Help me out.
Yeah.
And he said, do this. It's like,
Yeah.
cool, I can do this. But the next time I thought of something. And so even if you can't think of anything yourself, talk to your management.
Process improvement, right?
Yeah.
Maybe is there a better way? Is there a better way to engage with clients or prospects early in the funnel? Is there a better way to engage in discovery? Is there a better way to present the solution, right? Once you've achieved a certain level of consistent excellence, what can you do to help others achieve consistent excellence, whether you're a manager or not, right? To me, there's always that room for growth.
That's beautiful. Chris, let's jump into the not so fire round because we're almost at the end of the time.
Yes.
I know you probably have 17 calls booked for after this.
I do have a call booked in 5 minutes. So yes.
So the not so fire round.
I'm on the clock.
I mean, we've already asked these questions before, so let's see if they've changed in the.
I'm sure they have.
So what do you love about sales engineering?
The relationships that you have the opportunity to build and create, both with colleagues and customers.
Okay. And what do you consider is your superpower?
Wow, that's tough. I think my superpower, one of my superpowers might be recognizing that I don't have all the answers and recognizing that everybody I talk to and interact with knows something about something that I don't. And there's always something to learn from everybody. And I treat every interaction and every conversation, honestly, in both my personal and professional life, with just that sense of interest and curiosity and recognition that there's always something new to learn.
So I guess if I were to summarize, your superpower is curiosity.
Might be.
I like it. You wrote the book, The 6 Habits of Highly Effective Sales Engineers, which I love, and I have a signed copy. Actually, it's right next to me.
Awesome. That. Love that.
Is there any other book that you would recommend or resource you would recommend to people who want to bust through plateaus?
So the two books that come to mind, there's a book that was written by a friend and colleague named Tom Stanfill called Unreceptive. And it is a book, and I think I've said to you probably on your show that there are a handful of books that have literally changed my life. Unreceptive has literally changed the way I think about sales and selling and life in general. So that's the first one that comes to mind. Because he was on my show yesterday, I'm also inspired to mention Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder by Garen Hess. Yeah. Is another brilliant book.
Okay. Unreceptive. Got it.
Yep.
All right.
And by the way, I'm inspired to say, because I love the fact that you asked what book would you recommend that will help people break out of a plateau or a rut, as the case may be. And I think in order to do so, we need to change our thinking. And if we want to change what we're doing, we need to change our thinking. We need to change our beliefs. Both of those are books, I believe, that will change the way you think. And to me, those are the best books, the books that really just change the way I see the world.
Okay. They're on the list. Last question of the not so fire on Chris is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your personal or professional life?
Yes, is to slow down and enjoy life a little bit, and just sort of better balance. I'm going to say
Yep.
is to just have better balance.
That's pretty good. We'll
It's,
talk.
it's,
We'll talk in a few months, see how that's going.
it's difficult.
It
right?
is difficult. All right, Chris, we're at the end of the show. If people want to reach out and connect with you, watch your LinkedIn Live, where can they do that?
So I would encourage people to connect with me on LinkedIn, Chris White, and unfortunately it's a very, very common name. So, they'll hopefully there'll be a link in your podcast
There
to
will
my
be.
profile. People can go to Tech Sales Advisors, that's all one word, techsalesadvisors.com, to learn a little bit more about me and the organization that I run. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, and hopefully you'll be able to find the LinkedIn Lives once we're connected.
Sounds great, Chris. Thank you so much for your time again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ramsey. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy our conversations, and this was no exception. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Chris, for coming on. This brings us to the end of the show. I hope you took something out of this. And if you have, I would love to hear what it is that you took. What was the biggest thought or aha moment, if you had one? Please make sure to share it on LinkedIn. Tag Chris, tag me, or Twitter, wherever you want to share it. Just make sure to share it somewhere, because you're not alone. If you're in a situation like this, know that you're not alone. I might be in it right now. We don't know. We're figuring that out as we go. Talking about self-awareness. So that's it for me for today. I really hope you took something out of it, and I will see you next time. With that, I'm signing off.